Welcome back to Two Names on Sports. I'm Nathan Simmons, and with me as always is Nathan Kwan. Today we'll be talking about the NBA and a few big milestones that have been passed, as well as NFL free agency, MLB spring training, and a few other topics. All right, here we go. Kwan, take it away.
Let's start with the NBA. The Rockets continue to be the most bipolar team in the NBA. They had a 2-2 week. They had two good wins against Memphis and last night in Chicago against the Bulls. So let's talk about the good. Last week against the Grizzlies, James Harden had another great game, 33 points, 11 assists, 7 rebounds. Garrett Gordon passed a milestone. He hit 183s in his first 49 games, which broke an NBA record for players coming off the bench. Clint Capella had a great game. He had a career high 24. Last night, it was another good performance after the first quarter. So they got off to another poor start, which has really plagued this team. They gave up 33 to the Bulls in the first quarter. It got down big, but they came back and their defensive performance really picked up. They held Chicago to 30 points in the second and third quarters combined. Ryan Anderson came back from an injury to hit 6 threes, and James Harden, he rolled his ankle, which all the Rockets fans held their breath when that happened, but he came back, got 19 points and 13 assists, and got Mike D'Antoni his 500th career win. So that was the good. The bad was the game against the Jazz on Wednesday night. So, in typical Rockets performances where they haven't done well this year is they've gotten off to really poor starts. They gave up 64 points to Utah, a team that was missing 2 starters in Derek Favors and George Hill in the first half, and they allowed the Utah Jazz to shoot 54% from the field. And they got killed on the boards again, 45-31. The defense was not good. Help side was bad. Fell asleep on cuts. Just guys running away from guys under the basket. And Lou Williams struggled. He was just 3 of 20 in midweek in those games. And so just this team up and down with their defensive effort, their 3-pointers when they're not falling, it really hurts them on the defensive end as well because they don't get back in transition. And so when they miss those long shots, teams can just get run outs the other way and it kind of just snowballs. And so Monday night was a good test for them. They went into San Antonio and they got off to a great start against the Spurs. In the first quarter, they built a big lead. It's just the Spurs do what the Spurs do. They adjusted their defense on James Harden on those pick and rolls, and they got a MVP level performance from Kawhi Leonard. He hit the game-winning 3 and then blocked the James Harden layup on the other end on consecutive possessions. And there was some questionable officiating going down the stretch of that game, which is, you can't say that cost them the loss, but there were certainly some phantom foul calls down the stretch.
Yeah, well,
and so
I mean, that's the thing too with like a lot of like close games is just that like those poor officiating calls end up swinging things, and so there's so much more noticeable than if it were like a complete blowout, you know?
Right. The last possession of the game was just really bad, really poorly managed. The Rockets had cut the lead to 2 points with 10.6 seconds to go, and they didn't choose to foul. They tried to get an 8-second violation in that situation, and they didn't get it. And then Pat Beverly tried to foul with like 2 seconds left, and the refs didn't call it, and the game ended without the Rockets even getting a chance by fouling the Spurs. So it was a tough loss, but I think just compounding that with the game against Utah 2 nights later, I think shows this team is a long way away from being championship ready and playoff ready. Within one game, even last night, how they can give up 33 in the first and then 30 combined in the second and third. It's just really inconsistent. And it's frustrating to watch. Their schedule lightens up this upcoming week, and so they're continuing to search for consistency as we head toward the playoffs. The 2 seed seems out of reach at this point, and then behind them, Utah cut the lead to 3.5 games. So the 3 seed isn't completely locked up yet either. So I think that's good for this team, that they need to keep playing and that they're not as good as they think they are sometimes. But let's move on to the Mavs.
Yeah, no, let's move on to some positive news. Mavs have completely destroyed Team Tank. And as part of that team, that it kind of sucks, but you know, I'm actually pretty excited. Some big news happened regarding far and away the best player that's ever played for the Dallas Mavericks. Dirk, this past Tuesday, passed 30,000 points in his career, and only 5 other players who have ever played in the NBA have ever done that. there have been more people that have walked on the moon than have scored 30,000 points in the NBA. Like, that's how big a deal Dirk scoring 30,000 points is. We'll talk a bit about it later, just how amazing Dirk is and like what his importance is to the NBA. But the way he went about doing it is far and away probably one of the most unique paths to it. But let's first at least talk about some of the wins this past week. So against Oklahoma City, they completely blew them out. It wasn't even close. Like, I mean, I like, even at the end of it, it was like they won by 10 points, but like they were up by like 25 throughout like most of like the third and fourth before they put in the scrubs on their bench. I mean, it was just not close. And Russell Westbrook was looking very like frustrated by the end. He arguably should have had 2 technicals and could have been ejected, but they took pity on him and gave him a flagrant on the second one, where he like pretty much like just tackled Harrison Barnes in order to get in Seth Curry's face. Speaking of whom, he's been on fire and just like scoring at a real efficient pace, both in terms of field goals and 3-pointers. He's been lights out from free throws as well. Nerlens Noel has been phenomenal as well. Dirk against the Los Angeles Lakers, like he almost got 30,000 points in the first, like he almost got to, like he was 20 points away from 30,000 and he almost got that in the first quarter. Like, that's how efficient he was. He scored his first 6 field goals and missed on his like 7th. Part of that, like those 6 field goals were two 3-pointers. And then there was an amazing sequence, like pretty much like right after he got his 30,000 points. They didn't call a timeout. They still kept running the play. Devin Harris got a steal and got a layup on the other end. And so the crowd was going wild even more. And then Lakers came up empty at the other end. And then in transition, they passed the ball to Dirk and he hits another 3. And then the Lakers were then forced to get a timeout. I mean, it was an amazing game. It was another blowout, and which kind of made what happened against the Brooklyn Nets a little bit of a disappointing game, considering like all the excitement they were having at the beginning, mostly because they were actually kind of down throughout most of the game up until pretty much like the fourth quarter, where they were able to like pull away and get that 10-point lead. But they were buoyed by good performances from Yogi Ferrell and Seth Curry then. But again, the big news of this past week was Dirk Nowitzki hitting 30,000 points. Pretty much completely revolutionized the power forward position, as well as how NBA teams go about evaluating talent and where they search for talent. If it hadn't been for Dirk, we wouldn't have seen this like huge transition from the NBA, from going from having like strong interior players playing at the 4 to having these stretch 4s that can like shoot the 3 and really space the floor, force the team's defense to stretch out. And then on top of that, he's far away the greatest European player to ever play in the NBA. And so basically the idea that you can find a legit all-time NBA great somewhere in Europe has really helped bring an NBA focus over there. And helped bring over players like Dennis Schroeder, Kristaps Porzingis, even to some extent, I guess maybe kind of Tony Parker, but like Tony was was close enough after like Dirk's debut that like you can arguably say that Tony also helped bring him over. But like all these European players to some extent owe a little bit to Dirk having this much success. And it's not like they hadn't been going over to Europe to find players, but like you wouldn't be seeing someone like Kristaps Porzingis going 4th overall if it hadn't been for someone like Dirk. To wrap it up, I mean, like, and you've already seen like probably a ton of like think pieces on this, but I think the importance to Dirk to me is just not only is he the greatest Mavs player of all time, but he sort of has become someone that has defined what this organization can be and what this sort of like organization represents to the rest of the NBA, which is that they can take all these sort of like, in essence, like cast-offs and sort of like build them back up and find sort of like a very unique, if not like quirky set of characters to like that can compete year in, year out. That's what Dirk means to me, if that makes sense. I mean, do you have any thoughts on Dirk yourself, being an outsider?
Yeah, total respect. I think He carried that Dallas franchise for really the past 15 years, and as you mentioned, revolutionized the power forward position in the NBA. I mean, you just look around the league and you think about power forwards that have similar games to Dirk Nowitzki, and like Kevin Love, Kristaps Porzingis, as you mentioned, Ryan Anderson, Serge Ibaka, Channing Frye, Paul Millsap, like Draymond Green. All these guys have the ability to shoot the three-pointer. And really, it's led to this game where you have 4x1, four guys outside and one inside. Dirk was one of the first guys that could really stretch the floor. He and a guy like Rasheed Wallace, they changed the way the NBA is played, and I think definitely well deserved. I think you mentioned European players; he will go down as the best of all time, and you always hear like teams looking for the next Dirk. You had like Yi and Lian, you had Andrea Bargnani. Now it's Porzingis who might be the next Dirk. But every NBA draft, you listen to the commentators talk about, oh, this could be the next Dirk. And the reason is because he was such a great player, and he was kind of just unheard of before he got to the league. I mean, he was acquired from the Milwaukee Bucks for Robert Traylor. And that looking back, that looks like one of the most lopsided trades in NBA history. But just what he's meant for that city of Dallas, and finally bringing a championship to them in 2011, I mean, he deserves all the accolades, and he still wants to play. I mean, he wants to play one more year, and we'll see. As you mentioned, the Mavs are looking in on a playoff spot for him. I think their schedule is tough down the stretch. They have a big homestand. I think that will really determine whether they get in, where they have Golden State, the Clippers, Toronto, and Oklahoma City, 4 games in a row at home. And I think that stretch will really determine whether they can get the 8 seed, because I think Portland and Denver have more favorable schedules down the stretch. But it's good to see that the Mavs are making a push, and well deserved for Dirk Nowitzki.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I mean, and in terms of the rest of the NBA, I mean, it's going to be hard to get Dirk back in, especially like with the way that Denver is playing with Jokic. And I mean, it seems like at least Portland's kind of like putting it together, because I mean they're always going to have that backcourt of CJ McCollum and Dame Lillard and Nurkic, who came over from Denver himself too, has been a godsend for that team. But I mean, in another like sort of like underrated part of Dirk's game has always been like how he always elevated it during the playoffs. And I mean, in the best example and arguably the greatest like playoff run was 2011, which I think might have to go down as one of the greatest playoff performances in its entirety. And just considering like how like the teams he had to beat and how he beat them, and I think his best performances were against OKC. Against Miami, he was great too, but that was also, I mean, it was very clearly also a team effort, and that's how they beat them as a team. But I still get chills thinking about it. You know, it was so much fun to like follow. It's been so much fun to follow Dirk's career. But yeah,
I mean, he's just unguardable. I mean, you talk about players that like, there's no way you can stop him without a double team. He could take you down low. So if you switch like a faster guy on him, he can post you up and then just shoot over the top. If you put a bigger guy on him, he could just take you to the 3-point line and take you off the dribble and go to the basket. And there was no 7-footer before him that could do that. And I mean, just like as you mentioned, Kristaps Porzingis, Karl Anthony Towns. I mean, Nowitzki doesn't have the athleticism of those guys, but he was really one of the first 7-footers that you could really take off the dribble and go to the basket as well as bang down low.
Yeah, well, actually, when earlier on in his career, he was actually very fast, and he played a little bit more like a small forward. Like if you actually put a bigger guy on him, he had the ball handling skills and the speed to like just blow past them and like dunk the ball. I mean, that's always been one of his more underrated skill sets, was just like how solid all around his game was back in the day. I mean, he's far and away at the very least a top 20 player. I mean, Dirk is just completely phenomenal. I love Dirk. Dirk is amazing.
Yeah, some other bits of news around the NBA. So the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are struggling since they've lost Kevin Love, their lead over the Washington Wizards and the Boston Celtics for the number 1 seed in the East has dropped to 2.5 games. They got some more bad news this week when Andrew Bogut, who was one of their pickups coming off the trade deadline, he got injured within a minute of his first game with Cleveland. And so he's going to be out for the rest of the year. And so interior defender that would help LeBron James has gone down. And that team, we'll see if they can hold on to that top seed. But right now they're struggling. They've lost 3 in a row. They've lost half of their last 10 games.
Well, yeah. Well, even still, I mean, I think the Cavs, they have LeBron, and it's just going to be like, at the same time, like, they should be more worried about just like, okay, just focusing on the playoffs, making sure that even if they don't get like necessarily the most favorable matchups in terms of like home court, like they still have LeBron, they'll still have Kevin Love, and they'll still have Kyrie. They just have to hope that they can all hold up and not get injured. But yeah, I mean, even still, like it is kind of surprising to see them struggle this much without Kevin Love,
Yeah, and their defense has really slipped from last year. They're 22nd in the league in points allowed, and there are rumors that even Larry Sanders, who's been out of the league for the last couple of years, might get signed by Cleveland because they just need the help so desperately on the inside. But while the East race tightens, the West race is really up for grabs. The Spurs, as we mentioned last week, have closed within a game and a half of the Golden State Warriors, who are going through struggles of their own. Tonight would have been an outstanding matchup for the top seed. If San Antonio were to win, they'd close to a half game. But it seems both teams are going to rest their starters based on the schedule. And Kawhi Leonard is banged up, might have concussion-like symptoms. And Tony Parker has a bad back. And Golden State's just road weary with going out to the East Coast, back to the West Coast, and then back to the East Coast again.
It's going to be a real battle of the benches right there.
Yeah. As we mentioned, that game is tonight, and we'll see. As you said, San Antonio will probably get the top seed. It looks like right now they're the hotter team, and by this time next week, they might be on top. But let's move on to the NFL. So free agency started this week, and the biggest news was, again, Brock Osweiler for the second year in a row being the big headline on day one of free agency, as the Cleveland Browns and Houston Texans made a historic trade as the Texans dumped Brock Osweiler and his contract on Cleveland, along with his second-round draft pick next year, in exchange for the Browns' fourth-round draft pick. The Texans also sent a sixth-round pick this year. And so you really have never seen a deal like this in the NFL. This is more of along the lines of an NBA trade, where you trade expiring contract to a team, since there's a salary cap floor that you have to spend, and then you get draft picks in return to rebuild. And so Cleveland recently had some new front office guys coming over from baseball. And so I think this is a win-win for both sides. What do you think?
I think so too. I think this is definitely a big win for Houston in terms of just like they can finally get out from under that Brock contract. Unfortunately, it's maybe a little too late considering some of the players they just lost, who we'll talk about in a bit. But just getting that relief from pretty much that entire like albatross of a contract, that in itself, I don't know if it's worth giving up a second-round pick, but it's definitely worth something. But and I mean, for Cleveland, they get a second-round pick. They get that second-round pick out of it, and then on top of it, they at the same time, like, I mean, I get like trying to kind of go through the process in and of itself, kind of in the same way that Philly did. And that makes a lot more sense in the NFL, just because you have so many spots on your team to fill, and you want the best way to really build a team has always been through the draft. And so like, why for them, it's just like, well, why not just like have a ton of draft picks? The big thing for Cleveland has always been just like making sure that they're actually able to scout and actually pick the right players going forward. But I mean, we'll see. We'll see how this works out, how this shakes out, whether or not this front office can capitalize on the amount of draft capital that they do have, actually get like great players out of it. I mean, like, not to always keep talking about the Cowboys, but I mean, like, hey, the Cowboys were able to get the Rookie of the Year in the 4th round this past year, and then they also got a starting cornerback in the 6th round and a starting defensive tackle in the 3rd. So I mean, it's not impossible to get great players in the draft and have them contribute right away. But I mean, it's on Cleveland to be able to identify that talent.
Yeah, and you mentioned the draft picks. They have 2 first-round picks this year, 2 second-round picks this year, 3 fifth-round draft picks, 2 sixth-round draft picks, and then next year they have 3 second-round draft picks and 2 fourth-round draft picks and 2 sixth-round draft picks. And so the NFL, really the depth of the team is built through the draft, and that's something that the Texans general manager Rick Smith has really struggled with, and he did some more strange things this week. So he let AJ Boye, their top cornerback, walk, and he signed a lucrative contract with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He also let Quentin Dempsey, who was their free safety that has a career-high 6 interceptions last year, walk to the Chicago Bears. And so the Texans have to rebuild their secondary again. I think in hindsight, it was really a mistake not to franchise AJ Boye. We mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but you knew the open market could get crazy with the amount of money that was being thrown around by teams, and them not getting that franchise tag on him that 1 year, it would have been around $15 million, where you get another year to kind of assess his value internally. Instead, you let him walk and you'll get a compensatory 3rd-round pick out of it. But Boye really was a breakout star for your team. He was one of the most improved defensive players in the league, and there's going to be holes to fill again in the draft for the Texans.
Yeah, it really made no sense, like why they didn't franchise him. I mean, at the time when they didn't do it, we were thinking like, well, maybe they actually do have a plan. Maybe they actually do have like something set up where they can sign him long term. But very clearly they did not, and it was just a dumb move by Rick Smith. I mean, it makes no sense, especially since like AJ Boye was actually arguably one of the best cornerbacks in the league last year. And I mean, granted, like that's pretty much been the only year he's been a starter in this league. And so, I mean, I understand being like hesitant in terms of like going all in on him, but I mean, at the same time, well, I mean, like, who else do you have lined up to fill in? And it just makes no sense why you would pretty much like risk letting them go. And then like when push came to shove, like you got pushed out the way by Jacksonville, which is another team in your division. I mean, it just makes no sense. I mean, kudos to Jacksonville in terms of just like, I mean, I don't know why they're like investing so much in this team, even though like it's very clear that the Jacksonville Jaguars are not that good. But I mean, kudos to them for signing AJ Boye, as well as Barry Church from the Cowboys, who was an above average safety, and as well as Calais Campbell. I mean, it's the 2nd year in a row where they've splurged a ton on the defense. And so, I mean, I guess kudos to the Jags, but I mean, like the Texans I don't understand like why they never seem to really like learn from any sort of mistakes in terms of just like when it's okay to spend, when it's not okay to spend. I mean, if you're willing to give $75 million Brock, like, then I don't understand like why you couldn't have at the very least franchise tag AJ Boye. I mean, it makes no sense at all. Like, I mean, it blows my mind that Rick Smith still has a job as a GM. It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, the notion that they are capped out of money, they have money available to spend, and they got even more money by unloading Brock's contract. And notion that they didn't have anything to give Boye and they couldn't afford the franchise tag is ludicrous, in my opinion. Well, I mean, we'll see who he goes after. They haven't really made any big name signings as of yet. They re-signed Nick Novak and Shane Leckler, so they have their kicking and punting game down. But I mean, if that was your priority number one, I don't know what you're doing. And I mean, Rick Smith, I guarantee you that Cleveland Browns trade was not his idea. Totally smells of Moneyball and what the Cleveland Browns were able to do with that creativity. I mean, I do not think Rick Smith thought of that himself.
Yeah, but, no, absolutely. That was like, I mean, he just doesn't come across like, I mean, in terms of like his like moves that he's done, it just doesn't come across as something that he just doesn't seem like someone that would initiate anything like super creative, you know? And that's the other thing too. Like, I mean, like if he had known about, like, if he had been actually trying to unload that contract, like he probably, and if AJ Boye actually wanted to stay with the Texans. Like, and that's the other thing too. Like maybe like Boye straight up said like he didn't want to stay with Houston or something, and he was like, well, okay, then I guess I don't really want to franchise tag you if you don't want to be here. But I mean, like, had he at least had any sort of notion that he'd be trying to unload Brock, then he probably would have told like AJ Boye, like, hey, like, I mean, we're gonna have a lot more cap space like within the day that you sign. So maybe if you wait a few hours, then like maybe we can work something out, and you won't have to sign with a Jacksonville team and like bank on this Jacksonville team somehow improving a ton over an off season, you know. But I mean, that's pretty much the Houston Texans for you. Let's move on to the other team in Texas, the small up and coming team filled with young players called the Dallas Cowboys. That being said, well, I wouldn't say they've necessarily taken an L this past offseason. They've definitely been feeling the effects of being so close to the salary cap and being close to going over. They've had to let 4 great players walk. I mentioned Barry Church, who was someone I thought they would actually be able to bring back. But I mean, it wasn't like Jacksonville really overpaid for him, but it was so much that it would have been unwise for the Cowboys to have matched that deal just because of how little cap space they have right now. They also let Terrell McClain and Jack Crawford walk. While we can't exactly say like the defensive line was great this past year, like they were decent rotation players, and we also let Ronald Leary walk and go and get paid by the Denver Broncos. I mean, at least with that one we kind of saw coming, just because it was just like we already had his backup in La'el Collins, who's a former who had first round talent coming out, but due to a pretty brutal investigation that he ended up not really having anything to do with, but because of that cloud of suspicion, he ended up not being drafted at all. Well, that, and also basically his agent saying like if he wasn't picked in the first 3 rounds, like he wouldn't sign or something like that. But yeah, like they have a lot of compensatory picks next year at least, so that's gonna be good. But the big news right now is Tony Romo. For sure, it doesn't look like Tony Romo is going to be coming back next year. He already released a message on like Instagram and his Twitter, thanking Cowboys fans and saying it's been a fun ride. So I mean, he doesn't think he's coming back, and I don't think he can come back after pretty much releasing that such an emotional message. But right now, so basically within a 24-hour span, it went from Tony Romo being released on the first day of free agency to basically being in a standstill and trying to trade him to a winning team. Right now, the 2 teams that seem most involved in trying to get him are the Denver Broncos and the Houston Texans. And right now we're in a sort of a game of chicken in terms of like which team blinks first and ends up giving up the asset for nothing. I mean, Denver and Houston, I mean, Denver for sure is just like waiting. I for sure waiting for Romo to be released, just because I don't think Denver thinks that Romo would go to the Texans by his own free will. No offense, but the Texans are kind of just hoping that he would. Otherwise, if they get the inkling that he doesn't want to go to the Texans, they might be willing to trade something to go get him. I mean, again, I can't imagine them trading too much for him. I mean, I could see them maybe like swapping first round picks and that being good enough. But right now, I mean, hopefully this doesn't get too ugly. But I mean, if after the draft, Romo is still on the Cowboys, then I would say release him, you know. But what do I know? We'll see. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the difference between Denver and Houston is Denver has more of a quarterback solution in-house. So Trevor Siemian, granted, he wasn't great last year, but he was a solid quarterback for them. They also spent a first-round pick on Paxton Lynch last year. And so I think if Romo comes to them, I think it's gravy for them. But I think even if he doesn't, I think they have a situation where they trust Siemian, and Paxton Lynch hopefully will develop into a starting quarterback. I mean, you don't spend a first-round pick hoping that he's going to be a backup. As far as the Texans, so they have two quarterbacks on the roster right now. They have Tom Savage, who was their 4th-round pick a couple of years ago. He's really hasn't played that much. He's been injured, and last year he got a couple starts. He was okay, didn't really blow you out of the water, and then he got hurt again. And you have Brandon Whedon, who at this point is a backup quarterback. So what I think they're going to do is I think they're going to wait for Romo to get released. I don't see them trading any picks to Dallas. And then we'll see about the money. Romo hasn't been healthy for the last couple of years, and so you can't really count on him being healthy for a full 16 games and being your solution long term. I mean, he's nearing the end of his career, and he will just kind of be a temporary solution. But you still need to go address that situation in the draft. And so I think they're going to see what they can do with Romo. And if the money works right, they're going to go that direction just for a 1 or 2 year solution. And then they're obviously going to draft a new quarterback because I don't think they believe that Tom Savage is the answer long term. So other kind of NFL news around the league, Alshon Jeffrey going to the Philadelphia Eagles, I think is a great win for Philly. They really lacked a number one receiver with much speed and catching ability after the run. So I think helping out the young quarterback there, I think Jeffrey is a great signing for Philadelphia.
Yeah, Brandon, and it's only like a 1 year deal too, especially considering like how like apparently he was offered like a longer term, better money with the Minnesota Vikings. Like the fact that he decided to still go over to a Philadelphia Eagles team that did struggle last year. Is a great win for a Philly team.
Yeah, he's just got to stay healthy and no more drug suspensions, and I think he'll be good for Carson Wentz in that offense. Brandon Marshall switching New York team, so he goes from the Jets to the Giants as an NFC East rival. What do you think of that signing?
I mean, I think it's kind of. I mean, I don't really understand it in terms of just like why Brandon Marshall would like. So the big reason like Brandon Marshall wanted to be released from the Jets was because he wanted to go to a contending team, and so he's like, you know what, I'm going to go over to the Giants. And I mean, no offense to the Giants, but I mean the problem wasn't the wide receiver core there. The problem was Eli Manning being the quarterback. You know, like I mean, it's like. I mean, they've been investing so much in like trying to make the receiving core over for the Giants be better. And I mean, the problem is just that like Eli Manning is just not that good right now. Maybe he does make a difference. I just don't see it.
Yeah, from an outsider perspective, they got to invest up front. The offensive line, their running game was so bad last year. And the receiving core didn't have a good game in Green Bay, but Victor Cruz and Odell Beckham and Brandon Marshall, you have a really solid receiving core. I think that they need to improve up front if they're going to catch Dallas in that division.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the other team in the NFC East, the Washington Redskins, are going through a bunch of turmoil in the front office. So they cut Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garçon, and then Kirk Cousins, their quarterback, who they've franchise tagged again recently, now has requested a trade, and so he could be on the move potentially to San Francisco. They also fired their general manager. So you as a Cowboys fan must be so sad that Redskins are going through this.
Oh, I mean, to me, like they always go through something like this. I mean, on top of it, also it's just like again, I mean, it kind of starts up front from just like, in my point of view, like the franchise name is just so gosh darn like disrespectful. It's a slur, and the fact that they're so lazy in terms of just like not even trying to like change it, to me is just dumb. But I mean, besides that, I mean, it's just like I mean, it's just run by Dan Snyder, who like for all intents and purposes, like I mean, he steps in when he shouldn't. I mean, he's not exactly that smart in terms of football. I mean, I'm sure he's smart in terms of like how to get money. I mean, that's how he got it. You know, I mean, that's how he became owner. You know, but I mean, they've always been a mess of a team ever since Dan Snyder took over. And I mean, as a Cowboys fan, it makes me happy to see that. But at the same time, it's just, I mean, it's got to be so frustrating to be a Washington fan. I don't even want to say that name. Stupid. It's a dumb name. I'm gonna straight up say it. It's a dumb name. Washington fan base. Like, it's got to be frustrating seeing that you were able to get a franchise quarterback in the draft in which you traded everything to go get him and for the second overall pick, and how like you still ended up walking away with a franchise quarterback, and yet you still don't want to pay him as a franchise quarterback in spite of the fact that you got rid of that contract with RG3. Like, you have the money to sign him. You're just too lazy to go do it. It's just, it's dumb. I don't understand it. I really don't understand it.
Yeah, I think Kirk Cousins is a quarterback. He's not going to be your like elite tier, but he is a starting, like average to above average starting quarterback in the NFL. Like, those don't grow on trees. And the fact that they still don't trust him enough to give him that long-term deal. If I'm Kirk Cousins, I'm absolutely asking for a trade, because like, what else do I have to prove to you to lock me up long term? If you still don't believe in me, let's just move on. Okay.
Exactly.
So I totally agree with Cousins not wanting to be there. But let's move on. Let's talk about some baseball. So some Astros spring training notes. So we talked about Carlos Beltran and what he might be on this team. I thought he would more be your everyday DH, but AJ Hinch this past week said that he will actually play 30 to 40 games in left field. And so the different combinations that they can do with that lineup, where you can have Gaddis at DH, you can have Gaddis catching, Beltran at DH, Beltran in the outfield, Gurriel, where does he fit, Marwin Gonzalez. So there's a lot of different pieces for AJ Hinch. And so Beltran at least will get some outfield time. As far as pitchers, Joe Musgrove continues to have pretty good spring outings. He's had 3 scoreless against the Mets. Lance McCullers had 2 perfect innings in his first start, and Dallas Keuchel is going to make his first start tomorrow. So the pitching looks pretty good. Mike Fiers, who is battling for that 5th starter spot, has a sore hamstring. He's going to miss today's start. And so Musgrove might end up getting that 5th starter spot. Charlie Morton looks to slot in at number 4. He's had some pretty good starts as well this spring. Fiers probably will get that bullpen long reliever role. Also in the bullpen, Tony Sipp, their lefty specialist, has really struggled this spring. And so a guy like James Hoyt, who's a right-handed pitcher, but he has really good splits against lefties, and his splitter especially has been really good this spring. And so he might end up getting a bullpen spot just because he's so good against lefties. And with Sipp struggling, I think that could be a bonus in his favor. And as far as the lineup is concerned, it looks to be Springer leading off, and AJ Hinch just said Alex Bregman will probably hit second behind him, and with Altuve and Correa following. So the lineup's coming together as well. Yesterday, actually, in the World Baseball Classic, Venezuela played Puerto Rico, and so that was Carlos Beltran and Carlos Correa for Puerto Rico against Jose Altuve of Venezuela, and Correa actually hit a home run. And Alex Bregman is also in the World Baseball Classic, and he had an outstanding throw from shortstop. And so it's interesting that Bregman's playing shortstop for USA and Correa's playing third base for Puerto Rico, since Francisco Lindor is at short. And so that's something long-term that the Astros might end up doing, is swapping Correa and Bregman, because I think Bregman has more of the natural shortstop range. He's a little smaller, a little faster. I think Correa is a little bigger, and he fits more of the Manny Machado third base role. And so so far what they've done is, since Correa, he's come up, he's been the shortstop. Bregman has just filled in at third. But we'll see long term if they might swap those two, because I think it might be a more natural fit that way.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, the infield that they have going forward, obviously you have those two, and you have Altuve. So the future is looking very bright for Houston for sure. Maybe the Rangers, their future maybe not as much, but right now, I would still say they're still within the window of trying to win a World Series. But for the Rangers right now, it's they've gone through their first wave of options. Andrew Faulkner got optioned, and it's beginning to look like they're not really all that interested in trying to sign him, nor Alvarez. So we'll see if they can maybe try to force their way back in. Brown Rock, Mendez, Sadzek, Gerardo, and Valdespina, as well as I believe Lewin. They also got reassigned and optioned. No surprises right there, mostly just because they still need some seasoning in the minors, but we'll see how they do. again, that third outfield and fourth outfield spot has been real up in the air, and we've been at least seeing some good signs from the people competing from that for those spots, specifically like Rua and Hoying, as well as DeShields, who we talked about last week. But Rua has been really hitting the ball very well. And Hoying's at least he's making some good contact and playing some good defense as always. But the big news this week was from Andrew Kashner, who we're hoping would maybe at least be a fifth starter at the beginning of the season. But it's beginning to look like he's not even going to be ready for the beginning of the season because he just had a setback this past week and might be going on the DL. He hasn't thrown off the mound for a week. He was shut down this past Thursday. He got an injection on Friday, but they're going to try to see if he can throw today. If he can't, then they might have to put him on the 10-day DL. We'll see how he goes from there. They'll try to look for someone else maybe to fill in that role. I mean, they have Mike Housechild, who they got from the Rule 5 draft. I know we talked about him struggling this past year, but he's still a pitcher, and he's still kind of you're forced to have him on your roster. So you might as well try to see if he can at least try pitching as a starter, see if he can get anything out of him. Nick Martinez was not good this past Sunday. Chichi was okay, but not great. He's been very inconsistent. And then AJ Griffin was awful against the Mariners this past week. So I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, the good thing about it is that they don't need a fifth starter until April 16th, just due to how the schedule works out for the Rangers. But I mean, it looks like it's going to be a bit of a mess towards the bottom of that rotation for us. So, I mean, let's move on to some college basketball, and we have a bit of a eulogy for our favorite college basketball team, the Texas Longhorns, after a great comeback against Texas Tech. I think they were like down like 10 in the second half, and then just played out of their mind and ended up winning by 10. They then followed that up with a hard-fought effort against the West Virginia Mountaineers, who predictably ended up winning. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about this last week, but I mean, I think it's good for them to get a win in the tournament. It was more than I expected, and getting that postseason experience for those freshmen and getting a win for those sophomores that didn't get a postseason win last year. I think it's a good boost going into the offseason, but as we mentioned last week, this team has a long way to go to grow up, and I think Matt Coleman is coming in will help. And I think props to Jared Allen. I think he's probably gone and going to the NBA draft. He hasn't announced that yet, but we'll see. I think he's a mid-first round draft pick, and so he's probably gone. He had a good year. He improved throughout the year. Much like Miles Turner, I don't really think he got enough touches to be as effective as he could have been, and I think at the next level, he'll develop even further as a player. But I think what he brought to this team, I think you can't really be disappointed by what he gave you this year.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, I think there's a good chance that he leaves. I also think there might be a good chance that he comes back, in so much that I think Jared Allen has a great chance of being a top 10 pick in next year. Just because, I mean, this year, it's just for him. I mean, his ceiling in terms of like when he can get picked, like the earliest he can get picked, I think is probably going to be the mid first round, but that's a lot of that has to do with just how stacked this NBA draft it looks. And not only that, it also speaks to how deep at the position is for power forwards this year too. So I mean, it's going to be harder for him to stand out this year versus like next year. If he comes back, he doesn't have any injury history, so there's that at least. And then on top of that, I mean, like, he's going to be able to play with someone like Matt Coleman, who's at least a legitimate like point guard. And I think Shaka Smart hopefully learns from this year that he should be getting the ball to his playmakers as much as possible, instead of trying to resuscitate the careers of Eric Davis and Curran Roach, who just, Curran Roach had a great game against Tech, at least. He can hang his hat on that, but just, good Lord. I mean, talk about disappointing. I'm a bit disappointed. I mean, granted, these are 20-year-old kids, so I mean, I can't. These aren't bad guys, but I mean, I'm just saying, like, man, just disappointed. Just real. I think at the end of the day, I can't be disappointed at like the effort of Jarrett Allen and Andrew Jones. Like like I said last week, they needed a more contribution from their returning sophomores, and they got so much less than that. So.
Yeah. Other Big 12 tournament news. I think the biggest upset that nobody saw coming was TCU getting an upset win over Kansas in the quarterfinal round. They ended up losing last night to Iowa State, who blitzed them with the 3-pointers and blew them out. But I think TCU, I think they're going to come up short in terms of making the NCAA tournament. They might make the NIT, but I think it's a big step forward for that program that has really struggled since moving over from the Mountain West. I think getting Jamie Dixon involved, who's a Final Four caliber coach, I think he's really built a program that's going to be successful in the upcoming years. I think Kansas State is another team. They upset Baylor in the quarterfinals, and they really should have been in the final tonight. They were up big on West Virginia last night, and they only scored 2 points, I think, in the final 5 minutes, and they blew that game. So I think they're going to be on the bubble come Sunday. I think it being a soft bubble this year, I think they're going to end up getting in, and they're a team that can actually make noise, I think, in the NCAA tournament with the way they play. So it's probably going to be 6 teams this year from the Big 12, with Oklahoma State, Iowa State, West Virginia, who plays Iowa State tonight for the Big 12 championship, and then Kansas and Baylor.
It's another good year for Big 12 basketball, even though like the two of the premier programs ended up having very down years in Oklahoma and Texas. But it speaks to how like kind of like the Big 12 has sort of like morphed into this like basketball conference. Not in the same way that the Big East has. Because at the end of the day, they still have like premier football programs. But it's kind of been bizarre watching how the Big 12 has turned into this.
Yeah. You think any of these Big 12 teams can get to the Final Four in Phoenix this year, or who do you think goes the farthest?
It's kind of hard to see any of them do that. Obviously you have like your Kansas and your Baylor and your West Virginias, but even still, like, even though I did say that they had like a great year in terms of like just like Big 12 stuff, I just don't think that there's enough firepower for these teams to make it, Granted, maybe one of these teams gets hot, like Kansas State, like you said, like they're a team that can make some noise. I think Kansas State will be a lot more focused now, that especially since they have had a huge like meltdown, like they'll be more focused this time around. But
so for me, I think Kansas has the best shot at getting all the way to the Final Four. I think they have the senior guards in the backcourt with Frank Mason and Devontae Graham, and obviously Josh Jackson, the freshman, like Gerald Vick. They have so much firepower on the offensive side of the ball that I think they're the biggest threat to come out of the Big 12. But a team like Iowa State that can just get hot shooting threes, they could be an early upset, or they if they get hot, they can get all the way to maybe the Sweet 16. So a team like West Virginia, I'm not as high on the way they just go through periods of time where they struggle to score. You can't have that in the NCAA tournament, but they are a great defensive team. And if you have a short time to prepare and you've never seen that press before, it's tough. So press Virginia has a good chance of advancing as well.
For sure, definitely. Let's move on to shout outs. What shout outs do you have?
Okay, so some shout outs. So the first was to John Ross. He had a 4.22 at the 40-yard dash at the NFL Draft Combine last week, which breaks Chris Johnson's all-time record. So congratulations to him. We'll see where he goes in the draft.
Yeah, and if he had been wearing Adidas, he could have had his own island. Which would have been amazing. Adidas was promising whoever broke Chris Johnson's record would be given their own island among many other things. But he decided to stick with with whatever non-Adidas brand he had. So missed opportunity by him, huh?
For the record, would you have chosen the island or would you have chosen the $1 million?
Well, I'm just sort of like wondering like how they actually have the island. So like which country would this island be a part of? You know, like like they were never very specific. So was it like, would I own this island, and like could I just like possibly like just like move there and then just like not have to pay taxes on anything anymore and just like sort of like build my own island colony? Like would it just be secluded? Like I'm just very confused by it. I mean, that's the other thing too. Like if you're going to break the combine record, then you're probably already going to be getting $1 million from whoever drafts you. So I mean, it's not like you're not going to be able to get $1 million, but like getting an island, like I mean, I don't know. I mean, like is it like one of those like fake man-made islands that they have like off the coast, like in Dubai or something? Like I'm just like confused about this whole thing. You know?
Yeah. So yeah, he ended up wearing Nike, and they asked him about it afterward, and he said, "Well, I can't swim that well, and I don't have a boat." So yeah, he passed on the island. Other shout out, MLS. The Houston Dynamo got a huge win last week in their season opener. They beat the defending champion Seattle Sounders 2-1 at BBVA Compass Stadium. It was 2 stunning goals in the first half that got them the win. Eric Cubo Torres, their designated player who has yet to score in 2 years, got his first goal for the team off a free kick. And then Romel Kyoto scored a stunner, curled it in from just outside the 18. It won the MLS goal of the week. And in the second half, Seattle came out. They got a goal from Cleveland Dempsey, but the Dynamo defense were able to hold them and get the 3 points at home. So it was a huge win for them to start this year. They play Columbus tonight. Let's see if they can get 2 in a row. FC Dallas also got a big win in LA, beating the Galaxy 2-1 in their first game. So MLS is back, and the Texas teams are off to a good start.
Oh, for sure, definitely, yeah. I mean, it'd be nice to see them meet sometime in the playoffs, and you can trash talk each other on that. But yeah, big wins by both teams. Another big win also by another soccer team, or I guess football in this case. FC Barcelona. Barcelona beat Paris Saint-Germain with a huge comeback in, I believe, Champions League. Good on Barcelona.
Yeah, they had gone into that second leg down 4-0, and so they basically needed to beat PSG by more than 4 goals to advance, and they were able to do that with the 6-1 win. And then the final shout out I have is Chris Stewart of the Minnesota Wild. We'll link to the video in the YouTube, but he got into a little scuffle against the San Jose Sharks, and he tried to punch one of the Sharks, and he ended up missing and hitting Zach Parise of his own team. So shout out to him for swinging and missing.
Well, Chris Stewart's always been someone that's like come close to being a bit of a I don't want to say thug, but like, you know, like someone that's like a goon. So I mean, the fact that he took out like not only one of his own teammates, but like I think it's his captain as well as I feel very poetic in a sense.
So that pretty much wraps it up for this week. I do want to mention that we have a website now, so you can go to twoNatesOnSports.com. And you can catch all our past episodes as well as links to our YouTube channel. And so go check that out. And I will talk to you next week.